show beets, and then he is going to, he's going to start on lunch as soon as he's done doing that. We're going to demo a tempeh slider. So he'll get you all set up with that, and I'm going to let him take over this part, and I'm going to sit back and maybe learn a little something that I don't know.
The really interesting thing I've found about it is we hear so much today about probiotics. The reason we hear so much about probiotics is because the Western diet is so lacking in it. Because of the Industrial Revolution, processed foods, this type of process was kind of like put aside. So you get your vinegar, canning, and stuff like that, and all the stuff that you buy at the grocery store. This was probably the oldest way of preserving food, just with salt and water and a vessel. We have really great innovations now, like these airlock lids, these pickle weights and stuff like that. We can almost assuredly, every single time we ferment something, it's going to go okay, unless the vegetable for some reason has like a bad spot on it or something like that. So sauerkraut by far is one of the easiest things to ferment. It's pretty bulletproof. So if you're going to start with something, that's a good place to start. So basically you just cut up your cabbage however you like it, whatever texture you like, size, shape, and then you put it in the jar, and then you make a salt solution. I think I forget how many pounds of cabbage to ounces or grams of salt. With a 2-quart jar, I usually just do 4 tablespoons of salt. Important thing when doing fermenting is the type of salt that you use. I go right to the pickling salt. You can use any type of salt, but they will lend different results. Reason being, a lot of packaged processed salts have anti-caking agents in them, which can cause your ferment to go a little cloudy, something like that. If you're using like real salt or other mineral salts, those will actually have minerals in them, again, can cause your ferment to be cloudy. So I will half cabbage. And then you want to core it. Everybody familiar with coring cabbage? You're just taking out the big stem bit right here at the bottom. So I cut the cabbage into quarters typically, and then I just do this. And that's enough. You just cut off that little butt end. I like my sauerkraut pretty fine, so I slice it pretty fine.
Oh, wow.
You can do this with a grater, you can do this with a mandolin. I mean, whatever gets you there really is fine. My preference is just a good sharp knife. So I'm going to prepare my jar in the meantime because I don't have a lot of space here. So, wide mouth jars, 2 quarts. I highly suggest using these for all your ferments. It's just so easy to make all of your measurements regimented to this size. So if you have 2 quarts of jar, you're doing sauerkraut, it's about 4 tablespoons of salt. If you're doing any other kind of ferment, pickles, beets, what have you, again, between 4 and 6 tablespoons of salt will always work. It just depends on how salty you like it, really. Now, do as I say, don't do as I do. I'm just going to eyeball it, but I've done this enough times that I know what I'm looking for. That'll do it. Next step, water. Amber, any of these are good?
Yep.
So, I'm just going to put a little bit in here first, and I'm just going to shake it until it's all dissolved. Wish we had some good shaking music.
Yeah.
How all the water is the same? How all the water is the same?
So, very good question. You can use any water, but different waters have different results. I prefer distilled or bottled water, or if you have good water at home with like a reverse osmosis filter or something like that, that's fine. Tap water, city water, you can use it too. However, you really have to let it sit out for 24 hours uncovered, or you have to boil it to get rid of the chlorine. The chlorine will kill the microorganisms that you're trying to create. So, city water, I've used it before, I've boiled it. It works. You're going to get a cloudier ferment because of the mineral content in the water. So, the less stuff you have in the water, the better. Again, same with the salt, as simple as possible. So, all right.
Keep it simple.
Keep it simple. So we're just going to start packing this sauerkraut. Oh, sorry. Now there's two ways to do standard sauerkraut. You can just brine it like this, or you can salt it and massage it, and that gets a lot of the water out from the cells. You can do either. I've done both on different occasions. The only difference is the resultant texture. So this is going to be much crunchier. If you put it in the bowl with salt and massage it, it's going to be a lot softer. Again, it's up to you what you like. So this is going to be messy.
Why is the first week more salty than the second week?
Because it hasn't created as much lactobacillus bacteria. The lactobacillus bacteria eats the carbohydrates and the sugars in whatever you're fermenting, and it creates lactic acid. And that's where you get the tartness from instead of...
Does the salt content go down? Because the first week one's
Yeah.
too salty for me.
Yeah, it's quite salty. The salt content goes down. The longer it sits, it gets more tart and less salty. However, there is always plenty of sodium in anything that's fermented with salt. So that's a consideration for anybody with issues with salt, for sure. I just found out recently that you can use, like, if you're making soy yogurt or, vegan yogurt, if there's whey left over, well, it's not really whey, but...
Yeah, it's kind of whey.
Yeah. You can use that
Vegan whey.
in lieu of probably 2 tablespoons worth of salt, because you're basically infusing your ferment with lactobacillus that's already alive and well. So you're giving it starter food.
And you can use a Rejuvelac as well.
Right. You could use your pickle brine. You could use sauerkraut juice. You name it.
You can't cut down the amount of salt.
You can.
You can.
You
like,
can if you use.
If you use either the whey or the...
Right. Yeah, you'll cut it down quite a bit. So you just have to be really careful with the cleanliness of your environment, because it might be a little bit more vulnerable. Oh, and that's something else I should speak to. A lot of people advise boiling your jars, which is always a good bulletproof way to start, to sterilize them. My tap water is extremely hot, so I'm fine with that.
You can also throw it in the microwave for a minute.
You can do that too. Anything to sterilize it. And your lids as well. And pretty much anything else.
So for health benefits, the longer you let that ferment, the better.
I like a good, strong ferment. So yeah, the 3-week-old sauerkraut, now you put that in the fridge, it'll keep for months. And the longer it sits, the better the benefits. I have some red beet sauerkraut over here. It's probably about a month and a half old. And you can tell because it's very, very tart. It will find a resting space. It will find a plateau that it won't get more and more tart. It'll just kind of stop. And then it'll just stay that way until it's no longer good, which, frankly, I've never had anything spoil on me before I got through eating it.
I've even found stuff in the back of the fridge that I forgot about.
Right.
It's all good.
All right, so this is pretty much full. For the purposes of our demonstration today, I'm going to stop there. And again, this is just cut and put in with a little bit of salt water at the bottom. Once I get these on, I'm putting on the top here to keep everything down. You want everything below the water line. That's really important. Now, sauerkraut and kimchi, since they're cut up like this, they're not always going to behave, which is fine. It shouldn't cause too much of a problem. So 2 of these guys should be fine.
below the brine, everything's fine.
Yeah, there you go. I love it. Okay, so next step is to fill the rest up with water. Now, there's a lot of different gear out there for fermenting, specifically when it comes to lids and weights. They have these things called pickle pebbles, which are glass discs. They look like glass hockey pucks, and you can sit those on the top to weigh everything down, to keep everything under the waterline. Or my personal favorite is the pickle helix. I don't know why they call it that. I think it's probably a spring from like a mattress that they just repurposed and probably like charge you another $20 for it. So I don't know if you know anybody that works at a mattress factory, let me know. So you want to give it a couple good shakes. Burp it.
When you have a tofu press and they have a coil in them, I wonder if that coil could be, it can be removed from the lid and the base. And
Yeah.
the tofu press coil could maybe help.
Absolutely. Anything that'll do the job, really. I mean, what we're doing now is just going to put this on top, and it's going to keep everything under the water line. A little more water here. And then this is a fermentation airlock. And what this is, it's got a little rubber gasket here, so it sits tight against the glass. And the top here has a nozzle that will allow the carbon dioxide that's created during the fermentation process to go out, but no air can come in. And that's important because this is anaerobic fermentation. Anaerobic means no air. So everything that we're fermenting needs to be under that water line, and I think we are good. There's a little piece of cabbage up there near the top, but the other fun thing about these fermentation lids is they come with a little pump that you can suck the air out.